Hi everyone, my name is Philip Stamberger and I'm a Principal Solution Engineer here at Snyk. Today, to talk about how building secure doesn't have to be complicated in .NET, I'm joined with Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony Devine, Associate Software Engineer here at Snyk.
Before we get started, let's take a moment to look at the anatomy of a .NET project. Here I want to have a look into the project file. At the bottom here I've got some dependencies including TinyMCE. Now if I decide to look a bit more into that dependency, I will find things like what we have on the Snyk vulnerability database telling me that this dependency is actually vulnerable. Here I've got a cross-site scripting example. Now I could maybe look at what's the range of that vulnerability, change my version to something outside of that range, and crisis avert it. Great. However, it's not always that simple because my vulnerability could be maybe not in TinyMCE, but in some of the dependencies that TinyMCE is relying on. And that's just one of the challenges we're facing as developers. Before we go into a live demo, and that's going to come further down the line, let's take a moment to look at what are the challenges we're facing more globally and what are some of the needs we have as developers. The first challenge is really the complexity of finding those vulnerabilities. I've just mentioned the transitive dependencies, but what about the code you're writing? Now, that's just one part of the problem. What if every time you run a scan, it takes half an hour? What if it's too slow? What if it's lacking accuracy? What if you don't have a lot of results? That's some of the complexity you need to take into account. And talking about accuracy, that brings me into the next one, the visibility. You need to have that visibility not only at the very end of the process into your CI/CD to make sure that your security gating is in place, but you might want to bring that visibility closer to yourself, into your IDE, into your CLI, in this kind of usage. You will want to be sure that you can see those vulnerabilities in different touch points, but also that you can see all of them. And then come what's the feedback of those findings. Finding vulnerabilities is great, it's just going to make you sleep less peaceful at night. What you really want is addressing those. How can we fix those vulnerabilities? What kind of advice, what kind of feedback can we get from the tools we're using to make sure that we can address those vulnerabilities and fix them? Either Snyk, either something else. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about Snyk here, and I think Snyk and .NET is a pretty good story together. First, into the IDE. Here we've got an example where we bring that visibility, letting you know which vulnerabilities you have, what you can do about them, really making sure that from the very beginning of your development, you can have that visibility into the kind of problem you will be introducing. But we like to give you choice, not just into your IDE, but also into your CLI. Here in this example, we can see that we're bringing remediation advice, we bring feedback and actionability to the table, letting you know how you can address things, either by doing an upgrade, which means changing the direct dependencies and having a domino effect that will fix everything underneath, or maybe doing a pinning. And here by pinning, I mean taking that transitive dependencies, asking it explicitly, making it a direct one, having a shorter resolution path to make sure that we force the version being used. Snyk is smart enough to know which one applies when and give you the right advice at the right time. In addition to being available locally, Snyk can also be run into your CI/CD. Here I've got an example into Azure Pipeline where we can see that Snyk is just an extra step. Super simple. But it doesn't mean we don't know what we find and we don't give you remediation advice on how to target those things. Here we can see we're bringing visibility into your CI/CD the same way we did it locally. Snyk is just an extra step in the pipeline. And here, as we did it locally, we'll bring visibility of the problems that you might introduce and prevent them from going any further in the process. But Snyk is not just a tool into your local environment or your CI/CD. We also have a complete platform that can surface all of those findings, give you reporting and things like that, but also more importantly, helping your security team to address some of the risk. Here we've got an example of a view for my vulnerabilities themselves. We can see I see the path from the introduction. I really have a deep understanding of where things come from, bringing that actionability to the table, letting everybody knows how we can address those things. And if I don't want to look at each vulnerabilities, but I want maybe a bigger bang for my bucks, that's no problem. We have an aggregated view where we're gonna say, here's the one action you can take to address as many vulnerabilities as possible. That's the kind of things, if you're already a Snyk customer, that you're familiar with. But what we're going to be introducing really soon will be the possibility to create an open fix PR, making sure that those advice can be automated, created and pushed directly into your repository. But enough about those third-party dependencies. I've talked about the first-party dependency at the beginning as well, right? Well, that's something where Snyk can help you as well. And as we did for the open source dependencies, we'll be able to do this across all the different touchpoints. Here, for example, I have an illustration of an IDE where I'm simply using Snyk to identify which vulnerabilities am I introducing, where they're coming from, and what kind of action can I take. Once again, understanding the complexity, bringing real-world example solution, and bringing me that visibility straight at the end of my fingertip. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is great. You want to see it in action. Enough about the talking, more about the making. And I'm with you. So that's why I'm going to hand you over to Tony, that's going to walk you through everything I've just shown and showing you how it works in practice and how you can start using Snyk today.
Thank you, Philippe. What you've said sounds great, but let's show our audience exactly how easy and effective using Snyk products can be for a .NET developer. So firstly, let's look at taking action using the CLI. So if you aren't already using the Snyk CLI, as a .NET developer, most likely you're using the .NET CLI. So let's take a .NET project and run it using the .NET CLI. So you can see using the .NET CLI that we highlight one vulnerability within the project. As a developer, you're probably wondering, what's next? What do I do? How do I take action? Well, if you're using the .NET CLI, it doesn't actually give you any advice on what to do next. That's up to you. So let's take the exact same project and run it using the Snyk CLI to compare the difference in the results. So if we run a Snyk test, great, so immediately you can see that there's already so much more information when you run using the Snyk CLI. First thing to notice is that using the Snyk CLI, we find 15 issues compared to only the one issue found using the .NET CLI. We're also given remediation advice. Fantastic. So not only are we told what vulnerabilities there are within our project, we're told how to fix them. And finally, all the vulnerabilities are grouped together according to the appropriate fix. So for example, if we look at the tiny MCE vulnerability, this takes the 4 vulnerabilities, and if we upgrade the tiny MCE from this version to that version, this will fix all 4 of these vulnerabilities. Great, so since we've had a look at open source dependencies, let's take a look at another product that we have, which is Snyk Code. So Snyk Code can be used alongside your IDE. Currently we're working on Visual Studio, but in the meantime it is integrated with VS Code. So let's start here. So Snyk Code highlights vulnerabilities of code that you've written. So you can find Snyk Code here. It's constantly running automatically in the background, and so any changes you make to your code, it picks up and highlights any vulnerabilities. So if we click on the vulnerability that's found here, brilliant, it takes us straight to where the vulnerable line of code is here. You can see that it also gives you examples of how to fix this vulnerable line of code. This particular example is due to the input not being sanitized, and so using these examples, this is an easy enough fix. Okay, so this is how we fix a vulnerability locally. Now, as Philippe previously mentioned about the CI/CD, let's take a look there. So Snyk enables security across the Microsoft Azure ecosystem. So we can go to, so I've already set up a .NET project running on the pipeline. So we can edit the YAML file here. And we can add the Snyk task. So we just need to fill this out and add the task, and this adds the task here, which I already have. We can edit the additional arguments to fit our requirements. So for in this case, my pipeline is running and it will fail if it's upgradable and if the upgrade is of severity high. So let's run this pipeline.
So Tony, what you're showing us here is that not only we can do it locally, but we can revalidate everything in the CI/CD. That integration is just a simple step into the YAML file, a couple of clicks away. To me, that sounds very simple, right?
Yes, exactly. Snyk is working with you. It's making things so much more simple. Okay, so as you can see, the pipeline has actually failed because there are upgrades to be made, and this is part of our requirements that we made in the YAML file. As you can see, this is actually a different project compared to the one we ran in the CLI, but this works exactly the same way that the CLI does. So if we ran this project on the CLI, we would get the same results.
So basically, Tony here, if I'm running the CLI in my CI/CD and I'm running it locally, I can really do the same validation on both sides, making sure that if it works on my machine, it works on the CI/CD and vice versa, right?
Exactly, Philippe. The CLI is running the same on both sides, and this is just another way that Snyk brings development and security together. Okay, so we've seen how Snyk works locally and on the CI/CD. Now let's take a look where it meets us in the middle at the repository. On Snyk UI, we can add our project via the CLI, GitHub, Azure, and many others. Let's take a look at the project I've previously imported, the one we were looking at on Azure. To explore the dependencies within the project, we can go to the Dependencies tab. We can see here that the dependency tree has been built. This shows us both the top level and transitive dependencies. To gain more insight into each vulnerability, we can go to the Issues tab. So if we search for a specific vulnerability, we can get more information on it. So this tells us how this vulnerability was introduced, what remediation steps to take to fix this vulnerability. So for instance, in this case, we're pinning. Snyk also provides us with a highest priority score, letting us know the severity of the vulnerability. We can also ignore the vulnerability if we choose to do so. The Remediation tab provides us with remediation advice for the entire project. The dependencies are again grouped by the appropriate fix, and you can see the name and severity of each vulnerability. One feature that is coming very soon for .NET is fix PRs. The button for opening a fix PR will be just like how it is for our other ecosystems. Let me show you what that looks like so that you have a better idea. We open a fix PR by either clicking on the Fix These Vulnerabilities button at the top. This will fix all the possible vulnerabilities within a project, or we can click the Fix This Vulnerability on each individual vulnerability, fixing only that specific vulnerability. So if I click Fix These Vulnerabilities at the top to fix the vulnerabilities of the entire project, Snyk lists all the vulnerabilities and group those according to vulnerabilities with a fix, with a partial fix, and without a fix. So we can go ahead and open a fix PR for this project. Amazing, so we've opened a fix PR. So you can see all the vulnerabilities are again listed here on your PR. And obviously once your tests have completed and passed, you can merge this PR. Great. Now let's look at a different project to see how you as a developer can fix vulnerabilities that you have introduced via your code. Using Snyk code here, we are running analysis on the code that you have written. This analysis identifies vulnerabilities within the code. Here on the data flow, we can see the full path of the vulnerability. Snyk guides you from source to sink. Snyk shows us what's wrong with the code here. Now let's see how we can fix it. If we go to Fix Analysis, this gives us examples on how to fix the code. This is what was shown before when using Snyk code within your IDE. Let's now take a look at a PR on the Azure pipeline. Here we can see that some of the automated tests on my pull requests are done by Snyk. What we are checking is, are we introducing any new vulnerabilities from a dependency, either direct or transitive? Are we introducing any new vulnerabilities via the code that we have written within our PR? In our case, it is all green and we know it's safe to proceed. But as a developer, if I was to add a vulnerability, I could follow the link straight back into Snyk, where I can see what the problem is and what I can do about it. As you can see, it's a similar experience to what we've shown before.
Thanks, Tony. This is great, but unfortunately we're running out of time in this session. There is a lot more that I wanted to talk about and wanted you to ask to show us. Everything you showed us so far, either it's locally on the environment, as part of the CI/CD, or even through the repository, can be for both the first-party code and the third-party dependencies. I think this is great, but let's maybe have a quick recap of the takeaway of this session. The first one is Snyk provides simplicity. We are easy to use, just a few clicks for each integration. We provide that friendly insight into your vulnerabilities. We help you understand how you can fix them. We bring actionability to the table. And we're doing that through a complete visibility, right? We help you understand across the SDLC which vulnerabilities is being introduced when. We help you remediate them where it matters locally, but then validate that as part of the CI/CD. Snyk really, I think, is a developer-friendly tool that fits into your workflow where you need it, when you need it, and gives you the right advice to address your vulnerabilities. Now, if you want to get started, the next step are super easy. First, I need you to create a Snyk account. That's free. Just go ahead Go to appsnyk.io/login, create a free account. You can use a GitHub account or a Google account, for example, to get connected. And then from there, you will be able to get started straight away. If you're already a Snyk customer or you want to understand more how everything we've shown so far worked, the best place is probably a .NET documentation. I've put the link on the slide, so I'll let you read that. But this is really the best place for you to get started. Just 2 steps, very simple. If I was to add a third one, it's probably fix vulnerabilities, but that's the mantra here. Develop fast, stay secure. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm Philippe Stamberger, Principal Solution Engineer at Snyk.
I'm Tony Devine, Associate Software Engineer. Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.